You know, so far in this chapter, we've created a bunch of different kinds of shapes and objects like lines and curves, and we've used perfect shapes even. And when you create these shapes, obviously you can manipulate them to be exactly what you need. Create a rectangle and you can create a bigger rectangle out of it or size it down, move it around on the page. But there's even more you can do with these objects thanks to the shape tool, and that's what we're going to talk about in this lesson, node editing with our shape tool. So the first thing we need is a new blank page. If you've been following along and you've got several pages open right now, you're just going to go down to the bottom here and click the plus sign to add a new page. We'll go to our pick tool now because on the property bar we want to be able to flip this on its side. Choosing the landscape button gives us our nice canvas. If you've skipped to this lesson, don't worry about that. Just click your new button, Control N on the keyboard, and then the landscape button to have what I have here, which is a nice clean blank canvas ready to start working with node editing. Now we need something to edit, so let's go back to some of those shapes that we've been working with in previous lessons. I'm going to start with my rectangle tool. If you don't see the rectangle tool here, you might be seeing the 3-point rectangle tool. Make sure it's the rectangle tool. By clicking and holding that button down, you get the flyout. F6 on your keyboard is a shortcut. And I'm just going to draw a rectangle right here near the center of my page. I'm going to let go, and I'm going to color that. I'm going to color it red. Clicking red on the color palette fills it up with red, just like that. All right, let's create an ellipse, and let's make our ellipse a perfect circle. Down below our rectangle, hold down your control key, click and drag till you get a nice round circle, and let's fill that up with a nice light blue or cyan. There we go. Next, we're going to draw a wavy line. That means we need our freehand tool. I'm going to go over here where I use the dimension tool last, but when I click and hold this 5th button down, I can access my freehand tool. F5 on your keyboard is a shortcut. And let's just click and drag a nice wavy line here across the top. Gets all smoothed out for us nicely. I'm going to change the thickness of that line by going up here to my property bar, and I'm going to go to 2.0 millimeters. You can choose 2 points if you're seeing points. If you're seeing millimeters like me, just something thicker so we have a line to work with. Now you may have noticed as we're creating these things, there are little squares showing up somewhere along the way in each of these shapes. Those are the nodes we're going to be editing. But before we do that, let's add some text. Now there's a whole chapter dedicated to working with text, so let's just do some simple artistic text. F8 on your keyboard or click the text tool over here in your toolbox. That selects the text tool. Now all we have to do is type in the words that we want. And I'm going to click up here above my line and type in uppercase, so caps lock key on, go with the flow. Exclamation mark, just like that. I'm going to click on my pick tool. It's still selected. I'm going to go up to my property bar, change that to Arial Black. It's up here near the top of my fonts. And maybe bump the size up. I'm going to double it from 24 to 48. Notice as I hover over these, I get a real-time preview. Maybe 36 is more appropriate. 36 points. And I'm going to move that down just above my wavy line. There we go. We can color our text as well. Let's go for maybe a bright yellow. That's hard to see. Let's go to a different one like magenta. That's easier to look at. All right, we'll deselect it by clicking outside of it, and now it's time to start modifying these shapes using our node editing capabilities thanks to our shape tool. We'll start with our rectangle. And when I click on it, you can see these little squares. They're smaller than the ones you see along the outside for sizing and reshaping. The nodes are tiny squares on the inside. At least they're tiny right now. When I switch over to my shape tool, the 2nd button down in the toolbox, check out what happens now. They're selected. That's why they appear to be quite large here in the corner. And if I click and drag them down and in, look what happens. I'm rounding the corners of my rectangle, all 4 corners, because all of my nodes are selected. And now some new nodes are appearing along the way as well. So if I drag that right back, right on top of each other, I'm back down to 4 nodes, and it's nice right angles at each corner. So if I wanted to just make changes to 1 or 2 of these nodes, well, I can click on one node, click and drag. Now I'm just rounding the one corner, and you can see how I'm creating a brand new shape here from my rectangle. I'm going to drag that back out, Click on it once. Let's see if we can select multiple nodes. I don't want them all, I just want these top two. So holding my Shift key down allows me to select the top two nodes, and now when I click and drag, I'm rounding just the top corners. And when I let go, it's perfectly symmetrical at the top, but it's a totally different shape. Now, that's pretty much the limitations of node editing with a rectangle, but momentarily we're going to change this to another type of object that allows us to do even more with our shape tool. Right now though, we're going to go down to our ellipse. So let's go back to the pick tool to select the ellipse, because I want you to see what it looks like when it's selected. There's our sizing handles around the outside, and just below the top one in the middle you can see there's a little wee node in there. So if I go over to my shape tool and I click on that node, it's selected. Watch how limited I am here when shaping something like an ellipse. When I click and drag, I'm going to go to about 45 degrees here, or 90 degrees, and let go. You can see I'm ending up here with an arc. Well, if I really want that to be a pie, I can click pie up here on my property bar, or if I want to close it in, a full ellipse by clicking right there. If I go the other way, same thing happens. If I stay inside the circle, I'll create a pie. If I go outside the circle, I'll create an arc. So if I stay inside, there's my piece of pie. If I drag that to the other side and stay inside the circle with my pointer, there's my big piece of pie. And if I drag that by going outside the circle, I get an arc. So I'm going to go back to pie and leave it just like that. Up we go to our wavy line now. We created this with our freehand tool. So here we've got a number of nodes along the way that help shape this curvy line. Let's go to our shape tool and make sure it's still selected. And of course we can click on it with the shape tool. You can see these little nodes as I hover over them. They're kind of hard to see. So let's zoom in. I'm going to click on my zoom tool here. And I'm going to click and drag just over the wavy line. There, it's a little easier to see those nodes now, and go back to my shape tool. So if I wanted to, I can click on a node. You can see these arrows that show up that allow me to change the angle of the curve. I can flatten it. I can stretch it. Bring it down, and of course I can move the node itself. If I want to make it more to the left or more to the right, I'm going to click on this node, bring it up a little bit, click on this node and bring it down a little bit, maybe over this way as well. Might do the same with this one, just bring it over a little bit to get that wave effect. And there's a node right there. I can do the same thing with, click this node. That's a nice effect right there. Maybe just drag it this way to smooth it out a little bit, and that way. So you got the idea. We've got nodes that we can play with, but what if we wanted some additional nodes? Maybe I want to be able to pull from this area. You can add nodes. First of all, there's a couple of different ways to do it. At the top on your property bar, there's a button for adding nodes as well as deleting nodes. I currently have nodes selected here, so clicking the delete button here is going to delete nodes. There, it's gone. And you can see that I don't have either of these buttons available to me now. I'm going to undo that, and instead this time click the plus sign to add nodes. And a node gets added in between here. So I've got this new one. If I come over here and click and then add a node, you can see it gets added between the first one and the one I had selected. I'm going to delete that node. So let's click on it and delete. And you can see all of those nodes are gone now. I'm going to undo that and show you another way to add nodes, and that's just double click. Double clicking anywhere on the line gives you some new nodes, and now I can just drag that down to get the shape I was after. Let's add a whole bunch of nodes here without actually changing them. I'm going to double click here and here, over here and here. I wonder how many nodes that is altogether. Well, if we go up to our property bar and click this button, we can select all of the nodes in our shape. And if I look at my status bar down at the bottom, I have 14 nodes selected. I wonder if I need that many nodes. It gives me a lot of flexibility, but also requires more system resources. So refreshing your screen and saving your file, it's going to take up more space and memory. So let's go up here to this feature, Reduce Nodes. When I click the Reduce Nodes, there's some intelligence built into CorelDRAW here that's going to analyze my shape and figure out whether or not I need all of those nodes. Some of them may not be necessary and are not affecting the shape. So clicking Reduce Nodes takes me down to 10. Look down below, now I've got 10. So 4 were removed. leaving me with these nodes that you see selected, so I can actually go in there and start making additional modifications if I wanted to. Let's go up to our pick tool now, and since our text is right here, let's move over to our text. One click shows you I've got a couple of little nodes here along the baseline, the bottom of my text. But if I go up to my shape tool, watch what happens. There are actually nodes before each of the characters, which means I can use those to adjust this text. I've also got this little guy over here for adjusting the kerning, the space between my text. So if I click and drag this out, you can see it's adding space in between. Of course, if I go to the left, I'm going to squish it all together. Got the real-time preview so you know what it's going to look like. I'm going to go the length of my curvy line over here. Now the nodes. It's time now to talk about what you can do with text here. If I want to adjust my text, let's say I go to this one here where the E in the, and I click and drag down. You can see I've dragged it below the baseline. I'm going to drag the T up a little higher than the baseline. I'm going to bring this down, down a little further, down there, up here. I can also move them left to right. Bring the G down. And you can see what I'm doing here. I'm creating a nice little effect. It's kind of matching my wavy line down below. It's the node in front of the character that you want to be able to alter. And we'll bring, perfect. Go with the flow. I like that. So I was able to modify each character in this string of text. Now keep in mind it's still text. If I go back to my pick tool and I click on this text, you can see with it selected, I'm able to do things like change the font and the size and the font attributes. That's because it is text. This is important to remember because we also have the ability to change our objects into curves, and that gives us even more flexibility. Shift F4 on your keyboard zooms you out so you can see the entire page. Let's say I wanted to go down to my rectangle here. If I go up to the Arrange menu, you'll notice that I have the ability down near the bottom here to convert this to curves. So it's no longer treated like a rectangle. When I do that, and I go to my Shape tool, now when I start editing nodes, it's not just rounding corners. I'm changing the actual shape here. So I click and drag a node. You can see what's happening. I'm changing the shape. It's no longer a rectangle. Of course, I can add nodes just by double-clicking on the border. And of course, I can click and drag up. Let's try it with our ellipse, which is currently looking like a piece of pie. Well, it's treated like an ellipse, a circle, until we go up to Arrange, down to Convert to Curves. Now I've got more nodes to edit, so I can click on my Shape tool. I can add, remove nodes. I can change the shape, really alter the look. And now I've got something totally different than that piece of pie we were looking at. Let's go back to the Pick tool. And our wavy line is already a curve. So we're going to go up to our text now and click on it. I want to zoom into my text, so I'm going to use my Zoom tool here. Click and drag, and I want to catch a little bit of a line down below. And now with my text selected, I'm going to go to my Pick tool, go up to Arrange, and I can even convert this text to curves. Now be careful here because it will no longer be text. In other words, you won't be able to change your font size and the font face, the font appearance. It's going to be treated like any other object when we convert it to curves. So we give it a click, look at the property bar, all those font options are gone, but we have full access now to each of these little shapes that look like text right now. So for example, with my Shape tool, if I click and drag this node, let's go inside with our Shape tool. If I click and drag this tool, I'm changing the shape of my T. If I want all my T's to be angled up like that, what about my W? Drag that out from both sides. Look at all the nodes we have. There's another W we want to do the same thing with. You can see I'm getting a totally different effect. My eyes, I'm going to drag the bottom left corner. My G, look at all the nodes around the outside. I'm going to drag this corner down a little bit and out. And now I've got a totally different looking piece of text that's really no longer text. I'm going to go back to my Pick tool. I'm going to do a Shift F4 to zoom right out, deselect by clicking anywhere out here on my page. And look at that, that's kind of neat. You wouldn't be able to do that unless you had nodes to edit, and you get a lot more nodes when you convert objects that are formerly shapes or text and you turn them into curves from the Arrange menu. So really, the possibilities are endless. You get a lot of options on your property bar. I encourage you to experiment with your shape tool, especially with objects after you've converted them to curves. There's one more kind of object we need to talk about in the next lesson, brand new here in CorelDRAW X4, and that is tables.